Sixth, the U.S. military system. Prior to 9/11, when the war for the Greater Middle East was in its skirmishing phase, mostly small-scale actions and most of them of brief duration, the all-volunteer force worked well enough. Whether the requirement was for boots on the ground or munitions on a target, enough existed to resource the task at hand. The intensification of the war for the Greater Middle East after 9/11, however, revealed hitherto unsuspected defects in America's basic approach to raising its military forces. Notwithstanding the considerable virtues of our professional military, notably durability and tactical prowess, the existing system rates as a failure. The all-volunteer force bears comparison to a burger from a fast food joint. At first glance, it looks good, tastes better, doesn't cost much. What's not to like? Take a closer look, however, and problems, not to mention hidden costs, become apparent. Here are the problems with the existing U.S. military system. It encourages political irresponsibility. It underwrites an insipid conception of citizenship. It's undemocratic. And it turns out to be exorbitantly expensive, and it doesn't win. Dishonesty pervades the relationship between the U.S. military and American society. Rhetorically, we support the troops, but support is seldom more than skin deep. In practice, we subject the troops that we profess to care about to serial abuse. As authorities in Washington commit U.S. forces to wars that are unnecessary or ill-managed or unwinnable, or in the Marshall equivalent of a trifecta, all of the above, Americans manifest something close to indifference. The bungled rollout of a health care program might generate public attention and even outrage. By comparison, as we have seen in this course, a bungled military campaign elicits shrugs. Certainly, our reliance on professional soldiers has relieved citizens of any responsibility to contribute to the nation's defense. But is that actually such a good thing? Back in the 1970s, when Vietnam induced Americans to abandon the tradition of the citizen soldier, Washington responded by creating a standing army. That's at least what the founders would have called the all-volunteer force. In their day, standing army was a term of opprobrium. An army consisting of professionals rather than citizens, they believed, was at odds with the principles animating the American Revolution and infused into documents such as the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. The shadow of Vietnam lingers even now, but with ironic implications. Everywhere you look, on TV commercials, before major sporting events, at political rallies, Americans today are busily making amends for sins committed or said to have been committed back when supporting the troops had become optional. And when overtly pro-American attitudes define the very inverse of hip, like men who got crew cuts or women who wore bras or anyone who voted for Richard Nixon. Today, blaming the troops for the wars that they are sent to fight has become all but unthinkable. Thank you for your service trips off American lips as easily as have a nice day, and with as little real meaning. The theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer had a phrase for such posturing. He called it cheap grace. The actually existing relationship between American soldiers and the American people is shot full of cheap grace. Seventh, the political economy of war. This reliance on professionals to do what citizens once did has produced unfortunate second-order consequences. Washington's appetite for waging war in the Greater Middle East, especially after 9/11 has exceeded the willingness of young Americans to volunteer for military service. This has created a gap. Too much war, too few warriors. Of course, Washington has pressed U.S. allies to fill this void. Some have done so on a token basis or with strings attached, limiting their utility. Overall, Europeans, Canadians, and Australians have evinced very modest enthusiasm for once again shouldering the white man's burden in hopes of pacifying or liberating the Islamic world. In an earlier day, a commander-in-chief faced with a shortage of troops might have proposed putting the country on a wartime footing. Ample precedent exists in U.S. military history for doing so. The events of 9/11 might have made it possible for George W. Bush to undertake some sort of mobilization, but the Bush administration consciously decided to leave the nation's existing priorities in place. The nation would wage a global war on terrorism as if it were peacetime. In the country as a whole, business as usual would prevail. This gap between expanding military requirements and limited military resources, notably in numbers of soldiers, created an opening for profit-minded private security firms to flood the war zone. In both Iraq and Afghanistan, for example, contractors ultimately outnumbered uniformed military personnel, taking on tasks once performed by soldiers. In all of U.S. military history, this had never before occurred. And the results fell well short of being satisfactory. Hired guns provided by contractors, such as the notorious Blackwater, had a shoot first and ask questions later attitude that was, to put it mildly, incompatible with efforts to win hearts and minds. What they proved best at was raiding the U.S. Treasury. To charge all contractors with being incompetent or corrupt would be unfair. Yet waste and corruption have occurred on a colossal scale, so much so that the Pentagon is literally unable to say where all the money went. Hundreds of billions of dollars cannot be accounted for. Now, war has always created opportunities for some people to make money. America's war for the greater Middle East today has become primarily a means to make money. Astonishingly, very few people seem to care.